I'm hoping that most of us have seen the movie, I'm ahead of myself here, I'm missing a slide, have seen the movie A Christmas Story. In the movie A Christmas Story, there's a scene where there's a bunch of Cleveland, Ohio middle school kids who are at recess in the schoolyard. It's freezing cold outside, and there's a kid named Flick who is double dog dared to stick his tongue to a frozen flagpole. He takes the dare, and it really does stick. And then Flick panics because he can't get his tongue away from the flagpole. It was then the bell rang. And so all the kids had to run to class. He begged for help as best he could with his tongue stuck to the flagpole, but the bell rang. So the kids all ran back to class. The next scene shows the kids back in the classroom, and the teacher says, "Has anyone seen Flick?" And you can see the looks on their faces, and in his adult voice, he narrates, "Flick? Who's Flick?" This is funny to us because these kids are mimicking real life. And it's particularly funny, I think, because we know how these boys feel. We've done it, our kids have done it, and it's dumb, but we do it. And they're dealing with a problem the only way that they know how, without actually being honest. And that is, they avoid, they ignore, they act like they don't know a thing. And they hope that somehow it will all work out. As we grow up, we experience a lot of problems, and unfortunately, we learn a lot of behaviors to deal with our problems without actually solving the problem. And as we grow older, we learn to fine-tune our denials, we learn to fine-tune our excuses, and we fine-tune our evasive maneuvers. Now, we all face problems, we know that, and sometimes we feel like we have more than our fair share. But even if we do have problems, which we do, no one else knows about it because we don't talk about it. You know, most of us will readily admit, yeah, we have problems, but that's the extent of the specifics that you get out of most people when you know that they have problems. And people don't like to discuss specific problems with their life because people just don't want people to know the depth of their struggles, or they don't want to know their weaknesses in dealing with the struggle. And our struggles are day by day, hour by hour, and we get tired from having conflicts. So what do we do about our problems? Well, I propose in this lesson that the first thing that we need to look at is our attitude. Our attitudes are of primary importance to this lesson because our attitudes determine our direction. And there's a wide variety of problems that we could discuss. There's a wide variety of attitudes. And this lesson is in no way all-inclusive of problems and attitudes, but we're going to just look at a few of them. And the first attitude we're going to look at, and I don't know why I'm missing slides here. Oh no, here we go. Okay, is run from your troubles. You saw what the boys did when the bell rang, if you've seen the movie. When the bell rings, run away. And we do the same thing. So did Jonah. We see that Jonah, the Bible tells us, arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare, went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Jonah 1:3. Or we can run like Jacob did. He ran from his struggles for 20 years. And then Jacob finally comes to grips with his problems, and he returns home. And God appropriately renames Jacob. Jacob means deceiver, but God renames him Israel, which means struggled. And God tells him, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Jacob had such problems in his life that God even names him struggle. You ever feel like you had so many problems that God could name you struggles? Well, he ran and he finally decided to come home. And we too can run from our troubles, and we can rationalize our attitude, and we can make ourselves believe that we don't have any other choice but to run away. Or we can run away in another way. We can mentally run away. We can pretend that we don't have any problems, that the problems don't exist, kind of like the boys did in the classroom. When the teacher asked where Flick was, they're just looking around like, well, I don't know. We don't know anything about it. And we can do that too. There's a big problem with that, though. Few people can really ignore their problems effectively. And whether you ignore them or not, they're still going to be there. And so we have to face our troubles. Why? Because the troubles are there, and they are there because there's something amiss in our lives. And there's something that's causing us pain or frustration. And running from the problems or ignoring the problems don't solve a thing. And some try another attitude. Just give in to our problems. Sometimes we get tired and we give in. Even Elijah gave in. 1 Kings 19:4 tells us, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die. And he said, it's enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I'm no better than my fathers. He gave up. He was tired. He was scared. And he was, at least for a time here, he was in despair. There was no one there to encourage him or to help him. At least he didn't think so. He didn't know of anybody at the time. And so he was ready to give up, not even try anymore. And sometimes we like to give up too when we have a trouble, because we feel like the trouble is bigger than we are. We feel like we can't overcome it. It's just going to go on and on and on. Or we feel like if we do solve it, it's going to be unpleasant. We just don't want to deal with it. Or we could do attitude 3, which is accept your troubles as a fact of life and simply adjust to a life of trouble. Ralphie, throughout this movie, has a big problem. He wants a Red Ryder BB gun for Christmas, but he knows his mother is against it. And in one scene, she asks him, Ralphie, what do you want for Christmas? So he very excitedly tells her that he wants a Red Ryder BB gun. So his mother says, you're going to shoot your eye out. And Ralphie knew that he had a trouble now. He had a problem. And so he just gave in. And he said, I was just kidding. Even though Schwartz is getting one, I guess I just like some Tinker toys. And in his adult voice, he says, Tinker toys? I couldn't believe my own ears. Ralphie had accepted his problem. He had decided to settle. He lowered his standards, and he just decided to accept something he thinks he could live with. And something he'd be okay with, but it really wasn't what he wanted. And so Ralphie had given in. And in our Bibles, we have an example of this from Mr. Abraham. We read in Genesis 12 that a severe famine in Canaan causes Abram and Sarai, who is his half-sister and his wife, to seek refuge in Egypt. And once there, Abram's fearful that because of Sarai's beauty, that she would be taken from him and he might be killed. So he devises a scheme based on a half-truth. Abram and Sarai tell the Egyptians that she's his sister. So the Bible tells us now in verses 14 to 16 in chapter 12. So it was when Abram came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. See, Abraham had settled. He figured, well, it's probably overwhelming, and so I think I can live with this. And so he just changed his standards. And this may be one of the more common attitudes that you'll see with people dealing with their troubles. They just lower their standards or they lower their morals. It requires no effort, requires no change. You can keep your friends, you can keep your lifestyle, you can go where you want, you can do what you want, you can watch what you want, you can listen to what you want to, and hope that somehow it will all work out. So, is running from, giving into, or simply living with the troubles the only choices? No, they're not. How about just seek to eliminate your troubles by solving them? It seems obvious, but we all know the difficulty of actually solving our troubles. A few years of life teaches us that some problems actually defy solution sometimes, regardless of our determination or good intentions. So how about just a good old determination and effort? Is that going to do it? Not according to Jesus. Not always. Jesus told his disciples, he said, I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. So regardless of our faith and determination, a Christian cannot solve every problem. Even the apostles couldn't solve every problem that they had. And this is true for two reasons. The first reason is some of our troubles exist because of the actions of other people. We aren't helpless in the face of these troubles. We just can't solve them alone. For example, you can do a kindness to someone or help someone in need of encouragement. And one of two things is going to happen. That person will respond to your kindness, or they'll continue their behavior regardless of your kindness. And I heard a story relevant to this. You may have heard this. Carol decided she wanted to do something nice for her neighbor, Mrs. Smith. So she baked her a pie and carried it next door. When Mrs. Smith opened the door, she was surprised to see Carol holding a pie. Mrs. Smith says, "That for me? Thank you so much. I want you to know how much I appreciate you for being so thoughtful for doing this for me. Thank you." Well, because Mrs. Smith liked that pie so much, Carol decided the next week to bake her a second pie. When she took it over, Mrs. Smith opened the door and said, "Thank you, Carol, you're so kind." She took a third pie the following week. Mrs. Smith said, "Well, thanks." Carol took a fourth pie the following week, and Mrs. Smith said, "You're a day late with my pie." And then the following week, despite her rudeness, Carol baked a fifth pie. This time her neighbor went to the door and said, "Well, you know what? Your pies are all right, but you should try putting in a little more sugar, and the crust is a little bit hard. And I really would rather have cherry than apple, just so you know." Well, the next week, Carol got very busy, so she didn't have time to make her a pie. So as Carol's leaving the house, Mrs. Smith looks out the window and sees Carol walking out the door without a pie. Mrs. Smith opens the window, sticks her head out, and says, "Where's my pie?" We can admonish, we can help, and likewise we can teach people things, and one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to change or they're not. And then there's some problems that we can't resolve because it's not under anybody's power to solve. And one easy example, that's a medical problem. Paul had a medical problem that we think was a medical problem. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul has a problem that he calls a thorn in the flesh. Now we think it was a physical ailment, which illustrates that some personal troubles are beyond an individual's power to resolve. Paul prayed 3 times for the Lord to remove the problem. But the Lord declared that his grace would sustain Paul, and his power was perfected in Paul's weakness. And with that information, Paul was able to accept what his weakness was. Because Paul realized, and so should we, that if it weren't for troubles, Christians could easily feel self-reliant and not so much in need of God. Even with troubles, we can easily feel like we don't need God. And we know from studying our Bibles that some of the troubles that we have are there actually to help us and can be in our best interest. The Lord told us that our troubles are there to strengthen us and are beneficial. And James tells us in chapter 1, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials." Trials meaning troubles, problems. "Knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." We all know that learning is difficult, and it's no different when we have troubles and we learn from them. Learning is just difficult. But we can understand that our circumstances, good or bad, can draw us closer to God. And then you might be asking, "Well, Mr. Tim, what problems can you solve then? Because it sounds like we can't do anything." Well, I'm just going to tell you that I think that the problems that we can resolve are basically those of our own making. And those troubles exist because of our own actions, our own feelings, our own attitude of ignorance, our pride, our lack of wisdom, spirituality. All these things will cause us problems. And we have to make sure that we're not our own worst enemy by letting our attitude get in the way of resolving our problems. Okay, what ways do we get in the way of our own problem solving? First, we can defend our faults. We can defend our weaknesses that produced the problem in the first place. We can argue that we're not responsible for the problem, just like Aaron did when he fashioned the golden calf from the earrings of the Israelite women. After hearing the Lord speak on Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 20 and agreeing to keep the covenant in Exodus 24, the people of Israel became impatient with the length of time Moses was up on the mountain. So they go to Aaron and they ask him to provide a God that they can worship. And after giving the Israelites instructions on what to provide, he fashioned a golden calf that they worshiped. And he called this the God that brought them out of Egypt. Now, when confronted by Moses, Aaron blamed the people. And to make matters worse, he said he put the earrings in the fire and the calf came out just like magic. Of course, he didn't say just like magic, but he said the calf just came out. God was so angry with Aaron that we read in Deuteronomy chapter 9 that God was ready to kill Aaron. But Moses prayed for Aaron and God spared him. But if you were to ask Aaron what his role was in all of this, he'd tell you he wasn't even in the same zip code. Aaron's attitude was, "I'm not responsible, I'm a victim." And some people are like Aaron, and some will have even a different attitude than Aaron. Some people actually embrace their faults and weaknesses. They're proud. They're not ashamed. They feel as long as they're upfront and proud about what their problems are, about what their weaknesses are, that somehow it's okay, everybody's going to understand, and it's no longer a problem. And that attitude, like some of the others, never actually solves the problem. A lot of people, though, aren't proud of their weaknesses and faults. And they don't rationalize in that way, but they do some rationalization. You know, it's funny that we judge everybody else by what they do. We judge ourselves by our intentions. And often, when our mistakes or our weaknesses become evident to other people and we're aware of it, we go into self-defense mode. And common justifications, there's a list of them. It's not really my fault. I'm not to blame. I'm the victim. Or the circumstance gave me no other choice. Victim. Or when challenged to accept responsibility, we respond, "Well, you would have done the same thing." Victim. Or, "If you'd have been there, you wouldn't be saying that right now." Victim. But and then the one I hate, "You can't judge me." I absolutely hate that one. When any of these things, or when we say any of these things that I've just said, here's what we're really saying. Okay, what I did was wrong. However, I have a reason that makes it right in my situation, so my situation is an exception. That's known as situational ethics, that sometimes it's right to do the wrong thing. Of course, we know that it's never right to do wrong. Our troubles are never solved by excusing our problems, by defending our problems, by being proud of our problems. So what do we do? First thing, we have to admit that a problem is there. The biggest reason we deflect, rationalize, or ignore our problems is because we know deep down that if we admit the problem, we've got to change. And we also know that deep down that if we have to change, we're going to have to be humble. And there's two things that people just don't like, is being humble and changing. In general, I'm not talking Christians, I'm talking about people in general. People don't like change and they don't like humility. So, as an example, think about alcoholics and people that use drugs. The drug addict, they can't be helped until they admit that they have a problem and they're willing to do something about it. Both of those kind of people will routinely refuse they have a problem. They pretend that they have smaller, more manageable problems, that the problem is somebody else or somewhere else, and they're just playing, they just play the victim in all of that. And that attitude is characteristic of a lot of people because it's difficult to confess problems even to ourselves. Many people feel that confessing a problem, if I have a problem, I feel like confessing that problem is somehow confessing what I would feel to be a failure. And, you don't want to feel like a failure. So you feel like you're going to be a failure. And you feel like you're admitting that you can't handle something on your own. And that makes our feeling of independence kind of collapse. And you know how we all like to be independent. But Christians who are serious about resolving their problems have to ask themselves some hard questions and search for honest answers. And we have to have a deep down desire to do what has to be done. Simply wanting the problem to go away or feeling like you want the problem to go away is not enough. Finding a solution has to be a matter of urgency. You can't produce change without any sense of urgency. It's just not going to happen. And we know that change is going to have to take effort and sacrifice. And most important, I think, we have to be willing to do something to make it change. And you have to realize that doing the same thing tomorrow that you did today is not going to produce any change in your life. Change has to become a must. But the absolute greatest factor in solving your problems is confidence in God's ability to help His people. We have to have a consuming desire to know God and to be like Jesus. In the book of Acts, we read of a man who needed to change, and more importantly, he needed to be more like Jesus. Peter pointed out Simon the sorcerer's sin in Acts chapter 8, and he says, "Repent therefore of your wickedness and pray God that perhaps the thought of your heart may be forgiven you, for I see you are poisoned by bitterness and bound by iniquity." Simon then recognized his fault, and he asked for prayers. Notice, however, Peter said he had to repent, which was totally under Simon's control. It's easy for us to pray to God and say, "Lord, help me." But then we don't change, and that basically just means, "Lord, use your power in some marvelous way to magically make my problems disappear." And if that's your prayer, it's not going to happen that way. People that pray like that sit as a victim waiting for a wondrous act that's never going to come. The correct attitude is, "Lord, without any reservations, without any qualifications, I ask that you help me in any way that you will." no condition, nothing's off limits. A Christian determined to actually solve problems will put aside the defenses, put aside the excuses, put aside the false justifications, the evasions, and the pretenses, and they'll have the right heart and attitude. Now I'm going to have to throw in another caveat. Even with the right heart and attitude, we have to consider Paul's words, who knew the full meaning of trouble. He said, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." So what can God do to help? Can God really help me with this problem? I don't know what God can possibly do to help me with this problem, is what some people think. But we have to remember Paul's words. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think according to the power that works in us. There is nothing so terrible in your life, there is nothing so difficult in your life that it's going to surpass God's ability to help his people. And if we truly believe Jesus, then there's no reason to let our heart be troubled. So if you find yourself ignoring, blaming others, rationalizing, minimalizing, or otherwise not doing what you need to do to solve your troubles, remember to humbly take responsibility where you should, determine to resolve what you can, look for lessons in all you do, and above all, trust God in all that you do. And pray continually with thanksgiving for God's help. And also, when you see somebody else in trouble, remember Galatians 2. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Now this verse highlights the importance of communication. Can we really expect to bear one another's burdens if we don't even know what each other's burdens are? That's just something I'll leave with you. Ralphie says near the end of our movie, "Oh, life is like that. Sometimes at the height of our revelries, when our joy is at its zenith, and when all is right with the world, the most unthinkable disasters descend upon us." Ralphie's right. But with the right spiritual attitude, we will be ready when the troubles occur. Also, in closing, I'd like to say this. We can't always control which way our lives will turn. But one thing that we can always control is our response to our problems. So what's the biggest problem a person can have in this life? It's possessing a sin-stained soul that will not enter heaven in its current condition. Romans 3:23 tells us that all of us have sinned. And Romans 6:23 tells us that the wages of those sins are death. But God cares for us, that even though we have those troubles, He sent His Son into the world to die in our place, so that by His blood we could be found blameless, without fault. And God wants us to be His children. But that decision is entirely ours. We can choose to be a child of God, or we can choose to remain separated from God. If you are here tonight and not a child of God, and having heard the gospel, and you are a penitent believer in Jesus, and if you're ready to make a public confession of belief and be immersed in water for the forgiveness of your sins, then we ask you to come forward tonight as we stand and as we sing.